and welcome to the Government Operations and Regulations Committee. Today is Tuesday, February 21st, and I detect a quorum with council members Cash, Parker, Porterfield, Withers, and myself present. And we have a few items in front of us today. We're going to just go, don't have anything on consent, we'll go in order here. So resolutions on public hearing. We first have RS 2023-2011. This exempts Harts located at 2701B 12th Avenue South from the minimum distance requirements for obtaining a beer permit. Is there a motion?
I'll move. Second.
All right, it's been motion and seconded. And Tom, I'm sorry, Councilmember Cash, this is yours.
It's a restaurant that's opening up on 12 South, where there are many other restaurants.
Right.
It is a residence that is what's close to it. I haven't heard any concerns.
The one in
All right, yeah.
our neighborhood.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right, ready for a vote? All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, passes 5 in favor, none against. All
There he
right,
is.
next, perfect timing. Next up is RS 2023-2012 by Councilmember O'Connell. This exempts Frankie J's located at 1314 6th Avenue North from the minimum distance requirements for obtaining a beer permit. And there is an amendment and a late amendment. Councilmember O'Connell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one in
I'm
particular.
sorry. Can I get a move? Can I, does anybody
Move.
move? And second,
Second.
thank you. Councilmember O'Connell.
Yeah, thank you. We, as ever, and I know a lot of my colleagues understand this, who've processed distance waivers in denser urban areas, had some discussion about this in the community. It's a more recent application. We've got 2 on the agenda from the same neighborhood. In this case, the neighborhood worked because this one is so close to another establishment that had generated a lot of concerns that there were some conditions sought. You'll see those expressed as explicit recitals in the late file, but the general statement is there in the amendment. And so just for the sake of things, I'd like to move the late file on the floor. I don't know if we can do it in committee because we haven't been to rules yet, but I'd love for the committee to consider the late file amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember. And we just did this with my late filed amendment in budget, so we can. And so you want us to move the late filed amendment?
Yes, and Hannah,
not the
Ms.
regular.
Zeitlin, let me just confirm, we don't need the timely if we've got the late file, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So we can, if on the floor we get an objection, we can come back, but the preference from the community standpoint is to run with the late file.
So, Ms. Zeitlin, do we, so if we come out of committee with a recommendation on the late file, but no recommendation on the other, is that fine, or should we make a recommendation on both?
It's fine. He can offer the timely amendment regardless of whether it was considered by the committee.
Okay, cool, thanks. All right, any discussion? All right, so can I get a motion and a second on the late amendment?
So move.
Second.
All right, we're ready for a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, any abstentions? Passes 5 in favor, 0 against. Thank you, Councilmember O'Connell. It sounds like the next one is you as well. RS 2023-2013, this exempts Taco Mamacita of Nashville located at 1234 6th Avenue North from the minimum distance requirements for obtaining a beer permit. Can I get a motion?
So move. Second.
All right, Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the distinguishing principle here is that the neighborhood worked with this establishment for more than a year. There's a reason that they didn't have the conditions, and they worked to recreate some public art that had been on the building prior to the opening here. And I think because of the distinction between the uses, and the Taco Mamacita is a pretty well-established restaurant brand, there was less concern about the use creating some of the concerns, and that sort of explains the difference. But the neighborhood, I think, overall has approved both of the distance waivers with the acknowledgement of what you saw before. We'll obviously test that at public hearing tonight, but recommend approval.
All right, any questions, any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? All right, 5 in favor, 0 against. Thank you, Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, next we have RS 2023-2014 by Sepulveda. This exempts Uptown Fresh Market located at 39 901 Apache Trail from the minimum distance requirements for obtaining a beer permit. Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, Councilmember Sepulveda, do you want to tell us about this resolution?
Yeah, sure. Haven't really heard any concerns from the neighborhood, but it's located across from the shopping center that has like a Quickie Mart sort of thing and a nightclub, so it's just a grocery store.
So, we've got an Uptown Fresh Market in my district, and I wonder how come they're looking for a beer permit in yours and not mine. Sounds fun.
Oh, I have no idea. They like us better.
Oh, that's not fair.
Battle of the Uptown.
All right,
Thank you.
any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? 5 in favor, 0 against. The committee recommends approval. All right, next we have a resolution from Councilmember Cash, RS 2023-2032. This requests a Metro Department of Codes Administration to revise its landlord registration form to require a landlord to provide an acknowledgement the number of unrelated persons who may live together in a single dwelling unit. Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Councilmember Cash, do you want to tell us about this?
Thanks. So I talked to Codes, Will here, and others in Codes. Basically, this requests, and I think they're open to it, otherwise I would have written an ordinance, but requests that they revise the landlord registration form and that it has language on there that describes the rules around occupancy, whatever that may be, months from now. I think it serves two purposes. One, it just provides information to landlords, so those that don't really have any idea about what the rules are do have ideas, or are aware of what the rules are. And second, it has the landlord sign something that basically says that they understand the rules, and I don't think that this resolution or the changing of the form is a slam dunk that's gonna solve all the enforcement problems that have come up as we've discussed this bill, but I think it's something, and just getting good information out to potential landlords or landlords can't hurt. I guess the only thing that's gray area for me is, if we start trying to, if the landlord registration form starts trying to explain, how we've looked at, there's a number in Title 17, but then in Title 16, we have that chart, and, and I don't know how, I think for it to work, it needs to be pretty easy to understand, so I don't know how the stuff in Title 16 plays into that, and I guess if I could ask Mr. Dodd to kind of discuss what Codes foresees coming out of this.
Yeah, so first of all, we appreciate you working with us on this. The main reason we would like to see this put on there is, in addition to having a signed document saying that the landlord understands whatever that number ends up being with the legislation for definition of family, also it's another opportunity for hopefully landlords to share with tenants, because when you see those overcrowding issues, a lot of times the tenants don't know. It may be young people at college or something like that, and that landlord did not convey that to them. So hopefully this is another opportunity to kind of hold them responsible, and also more of a public education thing. They do have to come in. That landlord registration form is updated annually. And right now it's mostly just you list out the properties, you pay the fee, and then you come back the next year. There's really not a whole lot more information as far as what is entailed as far as being a landlord, as far as occupancy and things like this. This just adds a little clarification there.
I guess my only question is, here in the, or in what's described to us here, the summary, it says acknowledgement, the number of unrelated persons. I think in the resolution, it refers more specifically to the maximum number. Do you foresee that it's going to be tailored to any property and it's going to have the number of unrelated persons, or that it's going to tell the landlord the maximum number of persons? Does that make sense?
I believe it would correspond with whatever the overcrowding is connected to definition of family or dwelling unit or whatever. that's how we kind of saw it, as going hand in hand with whatever the definition is, whether it's what it currently is or what the possible legislation that Councilman Parker has changing it to. But let me get back with you on that for sure. I'd like to speak for our zoning administrator before I give a final answer on that.
And thank you for, and thank Councilmember Cash and code staff for working on this. When I saw the request to sponsor, I jumped on. I think it's a great idea. The only question, I guess concern that I have is around sequencing, maybe. Like, I'm a little concerned about, let's say there's a universe where we don't make the 1471 fails, right? And so we keep the kind of archaic mixed household thing, we keep the number at 3. You know, if that is the regulatory environment, I'm not super comfortable kind of increasing the enforcement toolkit there. So I wonder if you would consider moving this to the heel of the agenda tonight, so we can find out what happens with 1471.
Let me think about it, but, I mean, I kind of, you know, folks are talking that, you know, codes, Mr. Hall kind of said that they're still having trouble enforcing 3. And I think this by itself doesn't really do any enforcement as much as it does notify, and it does, you know, have a signature, but I don't know that that really changes anything about inspections and the Fourth Amendment and stuff like that. So I don't know that I want it to totally go away if 1471 doesn't pass, but
Well, if
I'm okay putting it on the heel. I'm not saying that I'm gonna kill it either way, but.
Well, I would, if you're willing to do that, and I would really appreciate it, just so that we kind of know what space we're working in when we consider this. I think that if that number is sort of what I would consider draconian figure that it is now, along with the mixed household prohibition, you know, I don't feel great about this. But if we get that number to something, if we fix the mixed household issue, and we get that number to something that I think is more reasonable with the sort of city we find ourselves in 2023, then I'm like, yes, let's go. I think this is great. So that's just a request from me. It's not a motion. So I just wanted to request that. Thank you.
Any additional discussion? All right, we're ready for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we're up to 6. Councilmember Nash, you want to join us at the table, or are you being counted, or? Sorry, I want to make sure we count you. So, all right, we're up
I
to
didn't
7.
vote on that just because it wasn't a part of the conversation.
Thank you. All right, and our final item of the agenda is a bill on 3rd reading. We have a substitute BL 2022, sorry?
I was humming, sorry.
Oh, okay. Substitute BL 2022-1471 by Parker and Welsh. This amends section 16.24.030 and 17.04.060 of the Metro Code to amend the definitions of dwelling unit and family. Could I get a motion to get this in front of the committee?
I'll move the bill as substituted.
Second.
All right, so the last time that we were in this committee, we didn't take this bill up because it was surprisingly put on this agenda, this committee's agenda, last minute, and it hadn't been in any of the prior readings or deferrals, so we weren't, that didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand why, and couldn't understand why as we got here, but we are now here, and we've had opportunity to go back and forth. The council office was ready to take questions about this. Director Darby, did the council office receive any Q&A from council members? None on this? Okay. So, what I want to do is, since this also was just heard in the Planning and Zoning Committee, and I believe in that committee, council members, since this is your bill, you were there, only one amendment was taken up, is that right?
We have recommendations on all 3 amendments from the committee.
Okay.
It was kind of an odd motion or an odd recommendation. The Planning and Zoning Committee essentially recommended approval of the bill as substituted with Amendment 1 applied. That's the recommendation that came from planning.
Okay. And were amendments 2 and 3 heard in
In
planning?
the previous planning committee.
Not today.
not today.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and hear those here? Why don't we go in opposite order? Why don't we start with Councilmember Pulley is still chairing that committee, isn't he?
I can speak to it. They're all the same, except for the number. So they all update, all three of the amendments, Parker, Johnston, Pulley, all update related versus unrelated and allow the mixing of that. They all add the clarifying language that codes wanted as far as one dwelling unit. That I don't think anybody has an issue with either of those two things. The third issue is what is in contention, which is the number of people we're allowing unrelated. My amendment leaves it at 3. Councilman Pulley's moves it to 4. Councilman Parker's moves it to 5. So I'm not going to speak for him on why he is saying 4. I think he was trying to come to a balance. You're ready for me to speak on mine? Okay. So I just think from an enforcement perspective that we're just not quite there yet. And clearly we're talking about issues with enforcement, what should be enforced, what can't be enforced, what's a reality of the enforcement tool. And I think until we can figure that out, and I'm not asking for a registry of blood, your DNA or anything. That's not what I'm saying. All I was doing was, in the previous committee, was pointing out that we don't do that. So if you say that you're a family, that's their hard stop of, okay, you're related. So it's my point is that it's unenforceable. There's no square footage in this as far as it's not related to bedrooms. It's a dwelling unit. So a dwelling unit can be 0 bedrooms in efficiency. It could be a 8-bedroom house. That's still one dwelling unit. I just think from when we've all talked about focusing in on our neighborhoods and creating our quality of life and all of that, to say, let's baby step this. Let's update the archaic part of it, to your point. Let's update that. Let's get to 2023 from that perspective. But let's really get our infrastructure from an enforcement perspective together before we start expanding on something that we've already identified as something really, really hard to enforce. I think what in reality will happen is that we're gonna have some homes that are being used, that are causing disturbances, that are 4, 5 people living there, that all we're gonna do is bring those folks into compliance, when that's not what's necessarily best for the neighborhood, because we don't have any other real life tools to address the problems that come with overcrowding. At this point, I don't even know what is the definition of overcrowding. What is that definition?
So I want to go to Mr. Dodd for a minute on a couple questions. Can you talk about how many complaints do you guys receive on this today?
Yeah, so we pulled some reports, I believe, before last planning meeting, and we had 297 cases of overcrowding since January 2020.
So in 3 years.
In 3 years.
So 100 a year on average.
About.
And is that specifically the complaint is overcrowding, or is it parking on grass or things like that?
No, that is registered as overcrowding into the system. Now, it also may be 2 or 3 other violations. Now, you could have a case where you have 4 or 5 violations total. That is a case that has at least one registered no-good violation code in city work.
Can I ask how many, real quick, how many cases do you get per year for cars on lawn?
Oh, that's a lot. Just looking at my District 6 reports, that's
right,
a lot.
me too.
Let's say 5 or 6 times that many.
Can you help me with maybe what, 100 per year on average? What's another type of a code violation that runs about that amount?
The same as 100 a year?
Yeah.
Ooh, I'd have to
Home
get back
business
with you on
bills?
that. Maybe home occupation.
Home occupation is maybe 100 a year?
Yeah, it's significantly lower than I would say your big 2 or 3, which would be parking on the grass, open storage, and trash and debris.
After the home occupation bill was passed, did that number increase or decrease?
I'll have to get back with you on that. I'm not sure, that was way before my time.
So probably, my guess is I think it decreased is what I'm picking up from my colleagues here. So, okay, that's what thank you, Mr. Dodd. Go ahead.
If I may speak to the amendment, what's really we're discussing the amendments, we're gonna make recommendations on the amendments, I presume, and then the bill. You know, the number of 7, which is what the planning commission recommended approval of, was something that we came up with by looking at a lot of other cities, how they handle this, what number they're at, and also just trying to kind of have a reasonable scenarios we could imagine. We wanted to have those be included, right? So we put 7 out there. The planning commission took no issue with it. There was nobody at the public hearing. There was nobody at the public hearing at council with the bill at 7. But since then, we have heard from some folks. I had a discussion with neighbor to neighbor, very good, like hour-long discussion, got some feedback from folks. Worked with Greater Nashville Realtors, is that the group that their legislative committee took a good hard look at this, and they were initially concerned about 7, but they were one of the parties that kind of said, okay, we could get comfortable with 5. So there has been a lot of discussion around this number. There's been a lot of consideration. There has been a compromise, I think, at 5. And so I would just urge colleagues to, let's not try to compromise on a compromise here, and let's kind of go with what the stakeholders have kind of settled on, which is Amendment 1, which lowers it from the planning recommendation of 7 down to a maximum of 5. So that's my recommendation on the amendments. I don't know how we want to handle voting on them.
Was it in 2001, is that when it changed from 5 to 3? Or maybe
I did not review what was in the code before the current code.
Okay, I think that what I've heard reported anyway. I don't know if anybody has that.
Yeah, what's currently in there was adopted in the 98. Is that what you're
98. Do you know what it was before 1998?
The 74 code didn't have anything listed.
There was nothing listed. Okay.
We went back and looked at both of those versions.
Okay, interesting. Cool. All right, thanks. Well, not cool, but cool. Thanks for the answer. Is what I mean by cool.
So I had a question, when you have a,
Sorry.
oh, I'm sorry.
Committee member
Oh, I
has
thought
it.
you were looking at me, I'm sorry, I just went, I'm right behind you.
I'm not sure what other cities were used, but I can, out in my area, this is a bad piece of legislation. It's suburban, it's kind of single-family small homes, and there's not a lot of extra parking at most places. And I'd be much more comfortable, I think, if we ran, if there's a landlord that felt like they had a piece of property that was really good for 7 people or 5 people, if we're gonna go, maybe a process where you go before the planning commission and say, look, I got this property, a little bit like you do an Airbnb right now. You have to go and make sure that you're gonna apply with all the rules. I think I'd be much more comfortable with something like that. There may be a house in my district somewhere that's got a big yard and a big old house that can hold more, but most of them are not, and I have not got any support from anybody out in my neighborhood about increasing this. Now, most of them were still assuming that it was 7. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with 5 either at the moment.
Councilmember Cash?
Yeah, a couple of questions. I think it was Councilmember Johnson that, I wrote down the words "not related to bedroom" and in square footage, and I think it was Councilmember Johnson that brought that up. And I mean, we're kind of hearing both sides of that, and so is it like this whole notion of Title 16 being relating, that it can be used for occupancy versus it's mainly intended for construction. I guess I'd like to ask Mr. Dodd,
Do you want to speak to that?
I kind of want to understand it both on from a legal standpoint. Can we legally use Title 16, the chart in Title 16, to determine occupancy versus how it plays out in practice if we're able to do that?
I would, the chair suggested that I answer that. I think because we've heard members answer that question both ways, I think it would be appropriate for codes staff to answer that. Mr. Dodd, if you could.
So we've had discussions about this. My understanding, so Title 16 is the building code, Title 17 is your zoning code. Now, both of those have restrictions, and both of those address what overcrowding would be or an occupancy limitation. Now, the table you're talking about in Title 16 is based off the square footage for rooms, like bedrooms, certain things, and it says, 1 to 3 occupants, 2 to 4, something like that. Now, that is instituted on the front end when we look at your site plan. So if you have a bedroom that's, let's say, 7 by 10, if we later on get an issue or a complaint that there are so many people living in there, the way we can enforce as we go back and we look at that site plan and say, hey, that's only a 100 square foot bedroom, and you need, 70 square feet plus 50 additional square feet for an additional person. So does that make sense? Like that's on the
Yeah,
front
so
end.
you're saying that when you got some of these 297 overcrowding complaints, that you pulled out plans to look at the size of the bedrooms and how many bedrooms there were in determining whether or not it was overcrowding?
I don't know what the process was for the inspection there. As Director Hall's mentioned before, a lot of the times those complaints come in from seeing other violations. And I know this has been discussed at length, but parking in the yard, things like that, those are typically signs that overcrowding may be taking place. So that is.
I'm asking specifically, when you get an overcrowding, you're trying to determine overcrowding, can you use that chart from Title 16 and that, or not can you, do you use that chart from Title 16 and plans of how much square footage and how many bedrooms there are?
Yes, so our property standards would go back and meet with either the zoning examiner or probably the zoning administrator and pull up that plan and say, hey, we've heard, or we can verify, again, it's hard to verify, but when we can, that there are so many people living here, well, there's only so many square foot per these bedrooms, we know for sure that they're in violation of that.
And if I may ask one more, when you were talking about the 297 violations, you referred to them as overcrowding. Do you know if any of those 297 violations were about the definition of family? In other words, it wasn't about the number of unrelated people, or it wasn't about like 3 unrelated, but it was like a family with somebody not related that lived with them. Do you know if any of those related to that?
I'll have to go back and check the notes because the code just reads overcrowding. Now, the inspectors do add notes and say, hey, here's an example of what's going on. I'll have to go back and read that because it's not included in the code that we pull up when we run a report.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Cash. Councilmember Young?
Thank you, Chair. Is there an occupancy limit on a short-term rental and Airbnb?
There is, I believe, maybe twice the amount of bedrooms or something. I'll have to go back and look.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
Do you know that?
I think it is twice the number of bedrooms, but it's also restricted out of RRS and
Yeah.
what's the other code? It's
But you can have
right.
12
RM,
people,
yep, RM.
theoretically, you can
12
have 12
is
people
okay.
stay at an
That's
Airbnb
what I thought you knew.
Right.
in the same house. Yeah.
So, I guess for me, I kind of come at this from a property rights standpoint. I mean, I have a 4-bedroom house. If I want to rent out each of my bedrooms, I feel like I have that right, so long I'm not infringing on the peaceful use of those around me of their own property. And I don't see how me renting out bedrooms in my house are going to infringe on those issues. Now, if there are parking issues because they're parking on the grass, you can come give me a violation for parking in the grass. If we're being noisy, well then, come give me a violation for being noisy. I guess, honestly, in an ideal world, I don't understand why we have to have a number on the cap. And it's not because I think you should have as many people as you want living there. What I mean is, I think something like the number of bedrooms kind of makes sense. I mean, if you have an 8-bedroom home, chances are it's not built on a little 0.1 acre lot, okay? So,
Maybe it's in Green Hills. I'm just kidding.
Or District 7?
but if we have, and
Maybe have
so,
a hike.
now granted, when you get 8 bedrooms or whatever, you can start getting into boarding houses, and I've recently gotten to have some experience with one of those in my district. But anyway, I guess the point I'm getting at is I don't like setting an arbitrary number, whether it's 7, 5, or 3. And so, I'm comfortable with 5 because I don't think that you know, I don't believe that we're giving this blank check, so to speak, this open season. And I guess when I'm trying to understand it, so maybe if like Councilmember Nash or someone else could help me understand, you know, the issues with parking and stuff, like if they're not parked in the driveway or in a suburban, and I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if you want to go to someone else, but what are the issues that we are foreseeing? And I understand maybe, you know, I see Councilman Cash with his hand up in an area that doesn't have driveways maybe, but I mean, maybe if the houses don't have driveways, maybe people shouldn't live there if they expect to park their car in front of their house and should be walking and biking. I don't know. I'm intentionally not going to buy a house that doesn't have a driveway because I want to park my car where I can get in it. And maybe that's simple-minded of me. So I guess I'm really trying to understand, because Councilmember Nash piqued my interest when he talked about a suburban area. I come from a suburban area. I have a driveway, you can put cars there, so I guess I'm open to like trying to understand what these issues and concerns are, and maybe some of my colleagues can help me understand.
Councilmember Porterfield.
Thank you, Chair, and I agree with a lot of your sentiments. I personally think that a bedroom approach makes more sense because in conversation with the council member, you know, now you're seeing a lot of homes that may be being built in certain communities that are 5-bedroom homes. We don't have that in our community. We still have houses that are 2 bedrooms. So five people in a 5-bedroom home makes more sense than 5 people in a 2-bedroom home, or 7 people in a 2-bedroom home. To your point about the driveways, we have driveways in our community, in my neighborhood in particular. It's one straight driveway. It's not enough space for 2 cars beside them. So you may fit 2 cars in that driveway. Everything else is on the street. Now that becomes then a safety hazard for visibility. When I'm walking my dog, when my neighbors are walking their dogs, when their kids are trying to traverse down the street, they're having to go around the cars that are parked, because we have a shared bike lane. It is a shared bike lane, so not a dedicated bike lane. So the cars are parked here. Children have to go out into the street in oncoming traffic to go around those cars just to be able to walk down the street, whether they're walking their pet, whether they're going to a friend's house. Now, thankfully, we are getting some traffic calming initiatives on some of those streets. We can't put speed humps and speed cushions on every street. It also causes visibility issues. I've gotten tons of complaints from communities where, because people are parking their cars on a hill or in a curve, they're not thinking about what the visibility is, or they're blocking the stop sign. They're looking at, this is the space in front of my house, and I want to park in front of my house. What then happens as cars are going around, they're pulling into oncoming traffic. So for us, and I can't speak for anybody else's community, but for us out in the southeast, where there's already a lot of density, there are already a lot of people in the community, I absolutely think that this needs to be updated, and we need to figure out what approach works. But the approach that may work for y'all in your parts of town, it's not gonna work for us in Southeast. It's just not. So I don't know if that's an overlay that applies to the districts that it would, be beneficial for. I don't know if that's a per bedroom. I'm so sorry. I wish I had some of the better answers. But what I know is that it's already an issue with enforcing it. When codes has been very helpful. I know you said that you haven't had much luck, but codes helps me out all the time with the issue. Maybe I misunderstood that, but codes helps me out all the time with these concerns. But the issue is when they knock on the door, if nobody comes to the door, what are they supposed to do? They can't force their way into the house. So I have neighbors that are telling me 10 people live in this house. They're taking pictures. There are cars in the yard. There are cars on the street. Everyone knows that this is happening, but codes doesn't have a way to enforce it because they cannot force them, nor should they force their way into somebody's house. So I'm not comfortable with it as it stands. I really want to support you, Councilman Parker, because I know the intent. I know that we have an affordability crisis in our city. We need to make sure that people have a place to live. I can't support this as it stands because of the impact it will have on my community.
Thank you, Councilmember.
So could-
If I may, I want to be clear that some districts, so District 7, for instance, has very different density in Madison as South Englewood as North Englewood. So we've got very suburban, large lots, large driveways, often no street parking really in some areas. In other areas, it's overcrowded and people walking in the streets. And in other areas, it's dense and a lot of apartments. And I think for one of the challenges that I have with this bill, and I brought up the home business bill coincidentally, but this reminds me of that. Like, that was taking place already and we legalized it. And the number of complaints maybe has gone up because we now have a mechanism for enforcing it, right? Because we didn't before. Not, well, we have more clear rules, but right, we have rules that can be followed and measured against now. I guess my question would be for Mr. Dodd, do you anticipate that the change of this, that by creating this new ordinance, that all of a sudden that's gonna open the floodgates for additional, obviously, none of us have a crystal ball. But I think, to me, much like the home business bill, this is probably already happening. It needs enforcement, so the answer isn't whether you can or can't. The answer is how much do you need to be able to, right? And that's, we're heading into budget season, so let's talk about that, right? Not today, not in this committee. But I think you know, to me, this is a boogeyman type of a bill in a lot of ways because it's already happening. And where it is happening, we need to enforce it. So I want to, and that's similar to the home business bill. Councilman Parker, and then I see Nash and Cash. And did you have something?
Well, I was passing my question down and hoping maybe he could address it.
I can do that here. So you know, to Councilmember Porterfield's point, I know that in Antioch especially, you'll have some real infrastructure challenges with the growth that's going on. I mean, we have it in my neighborhoods as well. Fortunately, ours were a little built earlier and gridded, and that makes some of these challenges a little bit easier, but we still, I mean, parking's a huge issue, and we have to work with NDOT to manage parking, to restrict parking to one side in some cases, to do resident-only parking in some cases, and I guess that's, you know, my ask is like, can you know, I don't know that a severe restriction on household occupancy is the best tool in the toolbox to deal with these issues that we have in our neighborhoods. I think it's a little bit of the old, you know, adage of if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you know, I mean, parking, traffic, noise, trash, all this stuff, they're major issues, but I don't think that a severe restriction on household occupancy is the right way to do it from like an ethical perspective, like weighing someone's ability to have a home versus someone's ability to park directly in front of their house. Like, ethically it's hard. And then also, I don't think it's effective. Like, I don't think that by keeping this severe restriction on household occupancy in place, it's gonna make anything better in our crowded neighborhoods where there's, you know, street parking's at a premium and we're having sightline issues and where there's children crossing and playing. I don't think this is the right tool to address those issues, and so I wanted to make that point. And then Councilmember Young asked if we set it at 5, would that allow 5 in a 2-bedroom home? And I believe the answer to that, and I'll look to Mr. Dodd to confirm, is, you know, what is the square footage of that home? How big are the bedrooms? Because if you've got 200 square foot bedrooms, you're not going to meet the square footage requirements that are in Title 16 to allow 5 occupants in there. And then I believe that it would be interpreted as the more restrictive of the Title 16 table, or the limit is the one that would prevail in interpretation. Is that accurate?
Whether it's that or short-term rentals or whatever, when there's issues come up, we always go with Title 17. Just because, according to the zoning administrator, that has a little more teeth when it comes, whether it's environmental code, or we take it to Metro League, or whatever it may be.
So this actually would put like a floor of whatever the number is.
Yeah, but again, if those bedrooms don't hit that square footage that's listed in 16, we will have it documented there, and that will give us the ability to go back. So there was some confusion earlier. We do enforce that table in 16. It's documented at the front end when you do your site plan or your building plan and stuff like that. that's not something we come into, once we get a complaint come in, that doesn't really help us because it's established square footage at the beginning. Now, we can reference that when we get the building plan later on, but it is enforced. And I know there's been some questions, like an efficiency unit or a 0-bedroom has, it's specifically listed as occupancy no greater than 3. So I know we had gotten that question quite a bit. I want to make sure we listed that as well. But a 5 and 2, if the square footage of the house and the rooms are made up to hit that minimum, then
So you're, and I know typical is a subjective word, but a typical 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo townhouse being built, so which I'm gonna say is in the 1,200 square foot range, and not knowing bedroom sizes, but that average one getting built, is that gonna permit 5 occupants?
I mean, currently, no.
Well, currently it does,
If we
if
go
they're
to
related,
5,
if
if
they're
we-
related.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, but if we go to 5 with the proposed legislation,
5 unrelated,
Yeah, since you're not tying it to bedroom at all, but you still have that square footage minimum, if you hit that square footage, then yes,
yes, what, yes, what, yes.
It would allow.
it would allow, yes.
We are running really far behind. The Rules Committee has to meet in this room. I want to just take committee members, we've got 2 more with questions, and then we'll take a vote. We don't have to come out of committee with a recommendation either.
What's happening out in my neighborhood, we're getting these corporations coming in, buying up duplexes and whatnot, and renting them out. And a couple of them have been Katie bar the door. I've had 2 complaints from some neighbors, and closes went out, and both sides were overcrowded. It's a group of workers get together, and all right, we're gonna get in here, is kind of what it's turned out. We just got the trucks, the cars, everything involved, and that's what we're seeing. And I just think with this new bill, without, again, I don't know that you can do one size fits all across this whole county with this bill. I think we really need to try and structure this a little bit more going forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Cash?
I'll be real quick. We've talked about the bedroom stuff a lot, and so I'll just suggest to Councilmember Parker and others that support the bill that this issue of bedrooms and how they can be counted or can't or not, like, I think we're still struggling with it in here, and just if we can crystallize that on the floor tonight, I think that would be helpful. And just, there were comments about comparing it to short-term rentals. Like the overpopulated short-term rentals have been a problem that this council and the previous council have spent a lot of energy trying to address. So I don't think comparing the 2 is appropriate.
All right. With that, let's go ahead and take a vote on each of the amendments. We'll go in reverse order, as I said. So Amendment 3 is Councilmember Pulley's, that changes the definition of the family, and then it changes the number to 4 people. All in favor, say aye.
Wait, I'm sorry, we're on
Sorry,
what?
we're doing Councilmember Amendment number 3.
Okay.
I guess, do I need to have them all moved and seconded and all that?
I'll move 3, move amendment 3, 4
Second.
people.
All
Let's
right.
vote.
How many people are in favor?
All right.
1, 2, of Councilmember Pulley's. 1, 2, 2 in favor?
Did you get me?
Yeah,
That was 3, right?
3. Okay.
Cash?
All right.
Amendment 3, that it says 4 people,
Yeah.
right?
That's correct. Yep. Amendment 3 shows
Yes.
4 people. How many people are in favor of that? Councilmembers Porterfield, Young, and Cash. And how many are against it? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So that comes out with a 3 in favor, 4 against, no non-voting. Councilmember Johnston's changes family, but it leaves the number at 3.
move.
Second.
All right, all in favor? 1, 2, 3 in favor. How many opposed? 3 opposed, 1 not voting?
I'm abstaining on that one.
And then Councilmember Parker's changes it from 7 to 5. Is there anything else that, and the definition of family, is there anything else on that, your amendment?
No.
Is that it? Okay. And that has been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye, or raise your hand, rather. 1, 2, 3 in favor. How many against? 1, 2 against, 3 against. And Cash, are you against as well?
I'm non-voting.
Not voting?
I'm-
Okay. All right, so Amendment 1 was coming 3-3 and 3-4, 3 against and 1 not voting. Amendment 2, 3-4, 3 against and 1 not voting. Amendment 3, 3 in favor, 4 against. And that concludes the business.
I want to vote on
Oh.
the bill is.
That's true, we should, thank you. So, the bill as substituted with no amendments, I guess? How do we do that?
You can't, I mean, you're gonna get up and make a recommendation on the floor about the recommended votes for each one, and you can just take a vote on the bill as substituted, or, I mean, sorry, as amended, or just as.
So, based on those amendments, should any or all of them get attached? I guess it'd all be an or.
They're not,
so.
it's, you don't have to do an amendment, you don't have to do approval as amended, you could just do approval, and then those amendments get moved anyway. You're gonna make a recommendation from this committee on those amendments individually.
So in general, the bill as substituted has been moved, has been seconded. All in favor of the bill as substituted?
It's substituted with the 5 people?
With 7.
With the 7 people?
Just pick your
Actually,
favorite.
7.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Wait, I'm sorry.
So the bill as substituted, the bill as it's currently
So
substituted.
no amendments.
No amendments,
Okay.
just as it's currently substituted.
Oh,
No?
negative, go
Can I
Charlie.
move,
Substitute has already been
can I-
moved on the floor.
Right.
It's already
can I
substituted.
move, the substitute's already on the bill, can I move that we make a recommendation on the bill with Amendment 1?
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
That's
Okay.
5 people.
Okay.
Alright, what is our recommendation, I'm sorry.
Sorry, so the recommendation with the bill as substituted with Amendment 1 on it. All in favor, show your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor? Okay. How many against? 1, 2 against, and 3 against. Okay. 4, 3 as amended. And that concludes the business of the Government Operations Committee. We are adjourned.